Thank you so very much, Emily, and thank you to all my friends here at the University of Sussex. It's great to be back. It's always very enjoyable, personal and intellectual experience to be here, and I appreciate you all coming to hear me talk about my newly published book, Democracy for a Sustainable World, The Path from Pnyx. I thought I might begin today by reading an excerpt from a letter that was written by one American to another American in 1816, where every man is a sharer in the direction of his ward republic and feels that he is a participator in the government affairs, not merely an election one day in the year, but every day. He will let the heart be torn out of his body sooner than his power be wrested from him by a Caesar or a Bonaparte. The American who wrote this letter was a man named Thomas Jefferson, who was a founder of the Democratic Republic of the United States of America. And Thomas Jefferson was, of course, a visionary, like the other founders of my country. But like almost all visionaries throughout history, Jefferson could not see through fully to the fullest implications of his own vision. In his time, there were enslaved Americans and women and some other Americans who were not included in that iteration of the democratic vision. And this has always been so. Looking back farther in history, whether Jefferson realized it completely or not, he was the visionary heir of those who first set out the original vision of democracy. Democracy was first established in a way we can recognize and to some extent identify with it in Athens in 508 BC on a hill called Pnyx, just a quarter of a mile or so from the Acropolis. If you go to Pnyx, as I have done, you will see that it's largely overlooked by all the tourists who go to Athens and browse the Acropolis. But there is where 2,500 years ago more, a renegade aristocrat named Cleisthenes and a lot of ordinary Athenian citizens created what we can reasonably call democracy. And our path since then in trying to further democracy is one that I call the path from the Pnyx. Like Jefferson, Cleisthenes and his Athenian allies could not see through fully to the furthest implications of their vision. If we look back at Athenian democracy, we moderns are shocked by its limitations. Women were excluded from democracy. Tens of thousands of enslaved people were excluded from the Athenian democracy. And so too were the immigrants in Athens who were called Pnyx. One of them was Aristotle. He lived there for decades, but he was not a citizen. However, for those minority of Athenians who were citizens, and here we're talking about free men, 18 years or older. Athens created a democracy that to this day is the purest democracy that has ever existed. They did so through a combination of direct democracy and the random selection of sortition. Now, as we look back, we can see that these were the beginnings of what we're still trying to achieve. But we have, in most ways, fallen short. What we call democracy today is only a semblance of democracy. It's much less of an actual democracy than the citizens of Athens had 2,500 years ago. And I find it wanting. It seems to me that it is long past time for us to achieve the fullness of the vision that was first seen and first practiced by the ancient Athenians, and then extended not only by the Americans of 1776, but also the French of 1789 and the British over a number of centuries, and so many others worldwide who have tried to make democracy real. But if we're honest with ourselves, then we must admit we have been only half Democrats. Why is that so? That is so because the heart of democracy is the still revolutionary idea that individual human beings are capable of self-rule. Individual people are capable of governing themselves. In what ways do our current democratic practices in the world, in my country, here in the United Kingdom, in other purported democracies, not to mention in the non-democracies and the phony democracies of the world, truly rule themselves? In what way do we have true self-rule? We do not. Why is this important? Look around us now. None of you need for me to describe the plight in which our species finds itself. Climate change, biodiversity loss, other extensions beyond the planetary boundaries of our biosphere, nuclear proliferation, conflict, pandemics, so much more. These are global problems that require global solutions. And yet we are unable so far to find them. The phrase democratic global governance is an oxymoron. And no one who is currently in public office anywhere in the world much believes that it can be anything other than that. And in the face of these challenges, instead of seeing efforts to achieve a stronger and deeper democracy for the people of the world, we see a retreat from democracy. We see an embrace increasingly of the ever-present temptation toward one-man rule. And it's always men, isn't it, who try to rule alone. We see an absence of trust everywhere in the world. Elites, governments, businesses, experts of all kinds are simply not trusted any longer. There are an abundance of reasons for this. I discussed this at length in the book, but you know these reasons. And we are only adding to them now. In order to achieve any type of cooperation, either at the grassroots level of the world in our human governance, or at the pinnacles of the world, global governance, we have to find some way of restoring trust. How can we do that? I have had the privilege of serving for decades now in legislative and administrative and judicial positions of responsibility at every level of governance, from the local to global. And in my view, what's missing in the world today is democratic participation. The only remedy for distrust is democratic participation. If we haven't, as Jefferson wrote, then we won't be willing to give it up. What's happening today is that many people worldwide are voluntarily giving up the democratic freedoms they have. The title of my book is Democracy for a Sustainable World. The book is about the connection between democracy and sustainable development. It's about the fact that democracy and sustainable development are interlinked, they're interrelated. In my view, we cannot have democracy without sustainable development, and we cannot have sustainable development without democracy. We need both, and we need to pursue them both simultaneously. Why is that? It is only through the human development that comes as a part of sustainable development that we can have the capabilities we need truly to rule ourselves when we participate in democracy. And it's only by having democratic practices and procedures, habits, and actions, especially actions, that we can find the will and the way to achieve social, economic, and environmental goals, sustainable goals. The two cannot be separated. They must be pursued simultaneously. How in the world can we begin to do that in a world that is retreating from democracy and from sustainable development? I am committed to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I've been working for them for a decade now. Before that, I worked for decades for sustainable development, along with trying to work for a better democracy in my own home country and worldwide. We're moving in the wrong direction, as we all know. Why not just give up? I don't believe we should ever give up. I don't think that's consistent with the highest order of the human spirit. I am an optimist. Furthermore, I believe we have a duty of optimism. So therefore, we have a duty to try to figure out how we can do what must be done, which is to elevate human prosperity everywhere in the world, while also protecting our imperiled planet. That's what we must do. And in my view, it can only be done through democracy and sustainable development. Where do I find sources, reasons for this optimism? I find them at the grassroots of the world. I find them in the literally thousands of experiments in democratic participation that are now occurring everywhere in the world in every area of sustainable development. Local and regional partnerships of people who are coming together, usually without any involvement of government at all, to try to solve real world problems relating to the goals of sustainable development. Eliminating poverty, eliminating inequities, and generally other distinctions, improving higher education, providing for public health, protecting the environment, addressing climate change, and so much more. There are literally tens, indeed hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people all over the world who are engaged in tens of thousands of efforts that have been listed with the United Nations as working on sustainable development. And beyond that, there are untold thousands more at the grassroots of the world that are working towards sustainable development but have never heard of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They're just trying to improve the life of their communities. These are reasons for optimism. These experiments do not find their way into the headlines of the world media, but these are the actions, the human actions, that give us hope for the future. And increasingly, these different networks are linking up, scaling up all over the world to become worldwide. Now, what did the Athenians do that I think we need to do as people? Well, first of all, I'm not a revolutionary, I'm a reformer. And I don't think we need to throw away our existing democratic institutions. I believe we need to reform them. The first step, I think, is making democratic representation in our current institutions more representative. In the book, I go on length about how we can create right representation in which representation will be based on merit and not on money or political manipulation by various interest groups from different parts of the world. It's through right representation that we can have the very best of individual wisdom to help us make the right decisions democratically all over the world. But to me, that won't be enough. To me, in addition to the best of individual wisdom, we also need the best collective wisdom. This is not an original thought of mine. This is Aristotle, that foreign immigrant in Athens. Aristotle taught us, and there's empirical evidence in the modern world to suggest that the wisdom of the crowd is greater than the wisdom of any one individual within it. But we must summon the wisdom of the crowd. How do we do that? I think we have to do it in the same way the ancient Athenians did, and that is through the random selection, sortition. And I explain in the book the mechanical ways in which this could be done. The Athenians had a machine made of stone and wood that provided them with random selection. You can see it today if you go to the Museum of Africa in the Agra Athens. It's called participatory. In the book, I explain at length how it worked so that there was random selection. Here's the good news for us in the modern world. We don't need a claritarian. We understand probability and the laws of probability, and we understand scientific random sampling. And it is through scientific random sampling that we can engage in the random selection that will produce and summon the best of collective wisdom to the task of democratic governance. We can do this at every level of governance, everywhere in the world, starting locally and including globally. And with the best of individual and collective wisdom, I think together we can engage in real problem solving. Furthermore, if people know that if they are willing to volunteer for a sample pool, then they have an equal opportunity with anyone else to become a decision maker among those chosen to do so through random sampling, then that will be the kindling of a new public trust that I think is a prerequisite to getting the real work of the world done. Again, it is participation that I see as the only remedy for the distrust that is currently keeping the world from any kind of needed human collective action. How would I do this? In every institution on the planet that purports to be democratic or even quasi-democratic, starting with local city councils and going up all the way to our existing international institutions, I would, through random selection, create circles of participation. I have chosen, based on my own experience and deliberation, different places in different ways, and on the basis of empirical evidence about human knowledge and decision making, decided that these circles of participation would comprise 151 people apiece. They would each have 151 people. Now you may ask, how in the world can 151 people reflect the diversity and the wishes of the entirety of the population of the planet, or even the millions in the sample pool that we might have if we engage in some of the outreach that I suggest in the book? The answer is through scientific random sampling, because with scientific sampling, what matters is not the size of the population. What matters is the size of the sample pool, along with the fact that the pool is in fact randomly created so that 151 people could represent a diversity, a representative sampling of 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people, 100 million people, so long as the sample pool itself is truly random. This is counterintuitive. It's like the theory of comparative advantage in trade. But like the theory of comparative advantage in trade, despite being counterintuitive, it is nevertheless true. It is scientifically so. And at a time when we're, as a society, moving away from the scientific method, I would suggest we need to move back in the other direction, especially in establishing our means of governance. So I would have dual decision-making by both the existing decision makers, the existing councils, in assemblies in these international institutions, international treaty bodies, whatever they may be, and also the circles of participation that would now be part of them. Furthermore, I would also create two other kinds of circles. One would be a circle for the future. Throughout my book, including in the entirety of one chapter, I talk about the need for naturization. What is naturization? Naturization is the process of getting we humans to understand that however special we may think we are actually one species among many. We are one animal among many others. And we are a part of the natural world. It's not the case that humanity is over here and nature's over there. Humanity is here and we are within nature. I would add, this means also that our economy is not separate from the environment. Our economy is contained within our natural environment. There are many policy implications to this, or not. And I believe that we need to institutionalize an approach that would provide ongoing advice to not only the traditional assemblies of these institutions, reformed through right representation, but also to the randomly selected general circles of participation that would help inform them about which decisions to make. And I would require those decision makers to explain to us when and why they might choose not to follow the recommendations of a circle of nature. Furthermore, I would also create randomly selected circles of the future. In these circles of the future, I would include people who will live in the future. I would comprise these circles of humans aged 12 to 21. Now, if you don't think that teenagers are capable of informed opinions about the future, then you have not been paying attention. I have a young friend up in Cambridge who has been leading at the ages of 12 and 13 one young man crusade to draw attention to the problems of the watery areas, the fens of Norwich, and he would be a great member of a circle of the future. I think we need their voices, not just in the streets, but in the corridors of power. In all of this, I would rely, as the Athenians did, only on volunteers. I don't think democracy should be a matter of coercion. I don't think anyone should be forced to participate. The Athenians did not think much of citizens who chose not to participate. However, they permitted them to refuse. I think we should do the same thing. And one virtue of this is that we would end up with volunteers who actually wanted to do this. That might skew the randomness just a bit. But I think all in all, democracy is going to be more successful if those who participate in decision making are people who are actively interested in making democracy work. Furthermore, I would make these deliberations by these circles of participation not only fully transparent online and otherwise, but also face to face. Now, some are tempted in this age of the internet to suggest that we could all get together online and vote yes or no. But to me, the key to the right kind of democratic decision making is having not just participation, but also real deliberation, in which everyone is involved, in which all the voices of the deliberators are heard and respected. I think that's the best way to make the best use of collective wisdom. Now, before I open up the floor collection to the questions that will doubtless come, how in the world do I believe that any of this could ever happen? It's obvious, I think, that I'm an idealist, but also keep in mind, I've been engaged in different kinds of government for more than 50 years. I am under no illusions whatsoever that any existing government in the world, much less a nation state, would initially embrace any of this or do anything at all to make any of it happen. They won't. So how do we make it happen? We make it happen by starting without them. We can look first to these local and regional networks for sustainable development, these experiments in democratic participation, and encourage them to link up more and scale up more and begin to work globally. And on the issues they care about, we can encourage them to create randomly selected circles of participation that can go to these existing institutions and announce, here we are. Here are our recommendations. We can continue and intensify the experiments that are already occurring in many places in the world, and especially in Europe and in the United Kingdom with citizens' assemblies, citizens' juries, and others similar forms of novel approaches to democratic participation. Efforts that are intended to seek out the views of ordinary people and weave those views into governmental decision making. We can surround existing institutions. We can very politely but insistently demand change. By making good recommendations, we can show that what we're recommending is actually what needs to be done, and that will add to the credibility of these efforts. And in my view, over time, we will then see that the existing institutions will be compelled to begin to listen and to change. Our international institutions now are impervious to the kinds of changes they must make. But as Plato said, our institutions are only living thoughts of humanity. And these thoughts cannot be rigid. They must progress. They must innovate. They must change over time with the kinds of challenges we face as humanity. And lastly, I would emphasize that in all that I'm proposing that humanity act as humanity. Notice that in my proposals for creating these new sortition circles, I'm not proposing that we go through nation states to do it. Nation states should have no involvement whatsoever in any of this. We might need them to secure population census data. We might provide that if they don't do it, they will not get some of the benefits they currently get from being members of the institutions in which we want to engage in sortition. Failing that, we can do our best with a lot of existing data that you can find online about where people live, who they are, and then we can engage in a global effort of outreach to try to enlist more volunteers. In the run-up to the Sustainable Development Goals adoption in 2015, the United Nations did an outreach program that reached about 5 million people. 5 million people formally participated in the effort to conclude the Sustainable Development Goals. We can reach out to millions more if we set our minds and our hearts to doing it together. And part of this must be that in doing it together, we must see other people in a way we do not now. We must heighten and broaden the scope of our moral imagination. We must begin to see humanity as one, and we must also see humanity as one part of the natural world. And in so doing, I believe we can restore the trust that is necessary to solving the problems our species faces in this time of trouble and turmoil. Thank you so very much. I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Right.
Now, there are 500 pages in the book and 1,000 footnotes. There's a bit I left out in this presentation, so some of it may come out, and I hope in the question and answer session.
I have lots of people getting their hands on it. I'll leave it to you to manage the unit.
Did you raise your hand, Emily?
I do have a question.
All right, I'll allow you to go first.
Okay, thank you. So in what
Thanks for buying me coffee.
anytime, we gotta keep you fueled. In what sense would these sortition circles be decision makers? What kinds of decisions would they be making, and how would those decisions be binding upon others?
They will be decision makers in the same way as the current decision makers are. But we would have dual consideration. In order, for example, I have proposed that we have a citizens' assembly chosen, a circle of participation chosen for the United Nations by sortition. This differs from the proposal that many have made that there be an elected assembly as an additional assembly to the current General Assembly in the United Nations. That would be a vast improvement. But that also would end up being a reflection of nation states. And I believe we must course, keep nation states. But in trying to create global governance, I think we need to go around nation states in part through these circles of participation. How would they decide? What would they decide? They would decide on the same things that the General Assembly currently decides on. And unless the General Assembly and the circle of participation decide to do something, it wouldn't be done. You would need the affirmative decision of both to do anything. You may ask, how will we ever get anything done if you have to have these two groups agree? My answer is, what are we getting done now? With respect to the World Trade Organization, what are we getting done? It's been a quarter of a century since we got anything truly significant done. The General Assembly of the United Nations passes resolutions. They have no legal effect. I would give UN resolutions legal effect as part of this reform. But what are they actually getting done? And that's true of a lot of our international institutions. Keeping in mind, I'm supposing we do this at every level of governance, but in terms of our international institutions, because of the pervasive distrust of people everywhere in the world, the nation states are unwilling to cooperate to do anything together in these institutions. If we create more trust by creating more true self-governance through democratic participation founded on random selection of sortition, then I think we'll be able to get more things done. So I would give them a full plenitude of decision-making power. And as I mentioned, with respect to the circles of nature and the circles for the future, and that I would also include in all these institutions, I would give them an advisory role, but I would require the decision-making bodies to explain publicly and justify when they choose not to take the recommendations of these advisory bodies. Who next? Yes.
Thank you so much. It's really fascinating. I've been also thinking the problem of the future of democracy recently, really, especially when you involve AI. And so this is the topic.
I'll be talking about that in my next book.
Okay. Okay. I'm just thinking. You say there will be a random selective personnel or a representative, but inevitably, they possibly will be selected by AI. And the problem will be how trustworthy it will be. Maybe you can have a fit.
Certainly at this time, they won't be selected by AI. And I would not give AI any role in the selection if I thought it might distort the selection. But there should be democratic governance of AI as well as everything else, in my view. Foreshadowing of my next book. How would you do it now? You do it with computers. Our current primitive form of AI, perhaps, but there's a certain amount of data. You make certain that the data is accurate. You make certain that it's random, and then you choose randomly among the choices you have in the sample pool. To me, that's eminently fair. It's where we try to rig the data that I think we undermine our efforts to achieve more democratic legitimacy. See, part of the problem with international institutions, as you well know, is that there is a democratic deficit. How much democratic legitimacy do our international institutions have when most of the nation states aren't even democratic. And half of the rest of them only pretend to be. And then even those that are democratic are, as I said, only half democracies. They're half democracies because there's no true self-governance. This is true of my own country, it's true of all the best democracies. They're really not nearly as democratic as they are to be. Because people do not feel like Jefferson said they need to be. To take my freedom away, then I will fight you forever. People don't feel that way. We see evidence of that every day. So I would think that we could, based on existing data that is retrievable, make a beginning, and we can go from there. The Citizen Assembly that was conducted in Glasgow, the COP26 on climate change, was the first global citizens assembly, and it was selected by a form of sortition that was as best as its organizers could make it at the time. And I think we can build on that type of effort. Now, a key to me is continuing to make the selection process truly random. Well-minded people will say, well, we need to make certain that this group or that group is represented in whatever we derive in the choices made from the sample pool. But that rigs the process. If you have a sample pool that is truly randomly selected, then you're going to have a selection for participation in the sortition circle, the circle of participation, as I call it, that is a reflective mirror of the overall population. It's only when you start to rig it that you don't get that. And when you start to rig it, you undermine the basic democratic legitimacy of the endeavor. I'll explain. If you are a left-handed female plumber from the South Island of New Zealand, there's a pretty good chance that even if you volunteer among millions, no left-handed woman plumber from the South Island of New Zealand may end up on the sortition circle. There may be one from the North Island of New Zealand, but not from the South Island. So if we define the identity and reflectiveness that narrowly, then the only way that you're ever going to get a sufficiently random sample is if the sample pool is the same size as the population. On the other hand, there are 331 million people in the United States of America. If we have a sample pool that is randomly selected from those 331 million Americans, what will happen in terms of representation of African Americans, say? Well, 13% of the American people are African Americans. The likelihood is that 13% of those selected randomly from a pool would be African Americans. As I said, some of this is counterintuitive, but nevertheless is scientifically so. This is basic scientific random sampling. And that is based in part on the laws of probability that despite their mathematic prowess, otherwise the ancient Athenians did not have. Yes, sir.
So random sampling, that sounds good. But then there's a second stage after that, which is shielding these people from undue influence from interest groups and including maybe even their own government. How feasible is it that they could be kept anonymous or shielded from?
This is a crucial question. I'm glad you asked it because I talk at length about this in the book and I didn't mention it in my initial opening presentation. All right, first of all, let's assume that you're an individual human being somewhere in the world and you want to volunteer to allow your name to be put on the sample pool for random selection so that you might have an equal opportunity with others to become a decision maker. Now, like me, you're a professor at Athenian University and you have a reasonably ample income and you have the time available. There's no problem in volunteering. It becomes one more pro bono project. But if you're some African woman in a village without running water and you'd like to volunteer to be on the circle for nature of the United Nations Environmental Program, how are you going to be able to afford to do that? How can you volunteer? You can't leave your family, you can't afford to go wherever you need to go to sit down for face deliberation. You're vulnerable potentially to influence by the powers that be, if you will. Well, my answer to that question builds on the answer Pericles gave to that question. Pericles was the great nephew of Cleisthenes, who created democracy. Pericles paid people for their time and serving on the jury courts and the other administrative boards that were randomly selected. And because they were paid, more citizens were willing to volunteer. Later on, in the life of the Athenian democracy, people were also paid to attend the assembly itself, which was always a subset of citizenry, because not all the citizenry could assemble on the hillside of the Pnyx. It could take only 6,000 feet of time, and at Apex, there were maybe 60,000 citizens of Athens. So you pay them. But what if this woman in this African village has children? Well, you provide childcare. What if she would like to volunteer, but she says to herself, I don't have formal education. I know the kinds of goals I have, but I don't have enough information. Well, you provide the information upon request. So what I've suggested, and I lay this out in detail in one chapter of the book, is that when one volunteers for a 2-year process. 1 year of those 2 years, it would be service on the actual decision-making by in that particular sortition circle of decision makers. The other year would be divided. 9 months before that 1 year of service will be devoted to preparation. And 3 months after that year of service would be devoted to accountability. In terms of preparation, those who have been chosen for these circles would, from the day they are chosen, be free to ask for any information they wished. And there would be also circles of experts that have been chosen, not randomly, but through a process akin to that, for which, for example, the Climate Change Convention and the Biodiversity Convention currently choose their experts. You could ask for information, whatever information you ask for would be provided. Not only would it be provided to you upon your request, but whatever you requested will be provided equally and at the same time to everyone else in that newly selected participation circle. The information would be provided in the form of information. It might, depending on the circle and the decisions of those in it, be in the form of something that would include options. I would not include recommendations. The idea is for these decision makers to be advised by experts and not to have the experts make the decisions. What about your question about being insulated from undue influence? I would have a code of ethics that would require full financial disclosure both before and after service on the participation circle to guard against bribery or other forms of corruption. If you're unwilling to submit yourself to such public disclosure, then don't volunteer. I would prohibit all forms of lobbying by outside groups, and that would include not only corporations and trade associations, but NGOs. I wouldn't allow them to lobby those groups either. If they want to participate in this process, they could be volunteers and they could submit to random selection. And I think many would, and I explain how this could be done for a lot of the specialized circles of participation that would be needed in a lot of specialized international agencies. And again, keep in mind, while I'm talking about the global level, while I'm talking about the way to make democratic global governance something other than an oxymoron, I've also proposed that this be done everywhere in the world at every level of governance as well. And in these 3 months that it would occur after service for a year, I would provide that these participants would have to submit to an accountability process. This is the money I spent. This is what I used it for. This is what I did. The Athenians did the same thing. Then if people completed the 2 years, and if scrutiny showed that they had acted ethically, I would give them a nice bonus. A further incentive, perhaps, to volunteer. All of this is described at some length in the book. I tried in my proposals to be specific about a lot of the details, but not exhaustive, because as you'll see in reading the book, I'm a great follower of John Dewey. Believed in the need for a living democracy, and it was part of his pragmatic thought that we learn by doing. And it's only by engaging in doing this that I think the people who participate in it will learn how to do it. So each of these circles would be permitted a lot of latitude to be able to decide for themselves how they wanted, for example, to conduct deliberations. Do you want to have an impartial moderator selected from, pre-created, pre-vetted team of moderators? Do you want to select a moderator from among your own members? But you want not to have a moderator, right? I think that should be left alone. Also, in terms of decision making, and this is informed especially by my experience of trying to help the WTO move forward by means of consensus, largely unsuccessfully. I would hope that the circles of participation could make decisions by consensus. That would be ideal. But if they cannot, I would have to vote. And since we would need the majority vote, I propose that they all be comprised of an odd number of participants. Who next? Alan.
Very interesting. Thank you, Jim. One of the other issues that occurs to me is who sets the agendas for these groups? Because in a sense, he who asks the question, has a great influence over the answer.
That's a very good question. Let me answer that, and then you can ask me another question. I would have them set their own agendas. My premise is that, for the most part, these people know what it is they want. They just may not know yet how to get it. If you're that African woman in the village that does not have safe drinking water, then you know you want safe drinking water. So you will raise your hand in the circle while deliberating and say, we need safe drinking water. And then that will be put on the agenda. Go on.
And each of the other 150 people will add something. And the point, I guess what the point I'm getting at is that certainly to an economist, all this policy making is about trade-offs. You can have this or you can have that. You actually can't do both. And in a sense, how the agenda is formed is very influential in how you come out on those things.
Yes, I will completely.
And I think, frankly, if these groups meet for 1 year, I'm not even clear how they get beyond the agenda setting process, let alone.
Well, the agenda setting process can occur before they even start formally deliberating. It's a 9-month period. Well, the same can be said of the Congress of the United States. The House of Representatives is a 2-year term. In fact, this is 2 years as well. This is all true. But in the end, it comes down, I think, to the question of whether we truly believe people are capable of governing themselves. Do we believe people can do this? Plato did not. So those who think they can't are in pretty good company. But there was another Greek philosopher of the same time called Protagoras who did. You can, you've done this sometime along the way. You can read Plato's Dialogue Critias and Protagoras, and you can see the interplay between the two of them on this issue. So I think people are capable of governing themselves, and if we think they are not, then there's an abundance of empirical evidence that many people are not informed or misinformed. Then the answer is not to deny them the ability to govern themselves. The answer is to do what's needed to be done to help them become more capable of governing themselves. Most basic level, this is about education and critical thinking skills. But in this context, the process of preparing to make decisions as part of the circle will be a process of improving their capabilities, whether it be in securing the right information, setting the right agenda, in making the right decisions. And if one believes, as I do, in the possibility of summoning and employing collective wisdom, then it becomes possible. And keep in mind, what I'm proposing is a blend of individual wisdom and collective wisdom. I think we need the best of both. The individual wisdom will come through the right form of representation, which largely we do not currently have. And the collective wisdom will come through the random selection, sortition. And together, I think, we'll end up producing the best decisions for the best outcomes. The test of democracy is the outcomes of decision making. Now, as I say in the book, democracy has both moral legitimacy and practical utility. What is this moral legitimacy? Every individual human being has an equal amount of human dignity, and therefore an equal claim to justice, and therefore should have an equal say in making the decisions that affect their lives. That's the moral claim of democracy. And that moral claim exists whether democracy works or not. Morally, it's still the best form of government, even when it does not work. But the good news for us is that when democracy is pursued in the right way, through true self-participation and self-rule, then democracy works. The democracy has worked, it does work, it can work a lot better if we make it more participatory. And if we, therefore, create a situation in which there is much more trust. I'll come back to you. In the back.
So we kind of already have a system of representative democracy where we think we are kind of electing the best people to do, we delegate out the decision to the best people, right?
That's the theory.
Well, that's the theory, yeah. And the system you're proposing would, at best, retrieve the average citizens of the world.
Don't overlook that I said we need both right representation and the random selection sortition.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, the right representation would give us the best of individual wisdom, not an average. The right form of random selection would give us the best of collective wisdom.
The average.
Okay. No, that's not an average. If you do the idea is that people come together and through their collective action, they reach a decision that would be better than a decision that would be made by any one of them in that same group if that person decided on their own. That's not an average. Read the book. Read Condorcet's jury theorem.
In a sense, you get the decision made by that group, right?
The decision will be made by both groups.
Okay.
It would be dual consideration. For anything to happen, both of them would have to agree that it should happen. So I'm not eliminating the possibility of electing, Disraeli or Gladstone to the parliament, or Lincoln or Roosevelt to the Congress. I'm saying we need to reform right representation so that we're more likely to get such people representing us instead of a lot of what we get now, which is considerably less than that quality. And then I'm proposing to couple that with random selection through these circles of participation. Not having that as a substitute representation, but as a complement to it. I'm proposing that we have the benefits of both.
What of equal weight?
Excuse me?
Of equal weight.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand you.
Of equal weight.
Equal weight.
Equal weight? Yeah, equal weight. Absolutely, equal weight.
The other question is, would you think that's feasible? We really have a lot of issues with one system working by itself. Putting two together?
I have spent a long life in various forms of public service, both inside government and out. For all my life, I've had people tell me that the things that I sought to do were impossible. When I was in the Congress of the United States, representing Central Florida, including the Kennedy Space Center, I wanted to create a space station. Furthermore, I wanted it to be international, because you won't be shocked to hear, after having heard all you've already heard, that I believe humanity should go into space, not as different countries, but as one. And when I set out to try, alongside others, to appropriate money into Congress to build a space station, put it in orbit, I was told it was impossible, because at the time we were 120 votes short of the votes we needed. And when I was finished, and when my allies were finished, we won the House vote 218 to 217. And 30 years later, that space station is still in orbit. When I was a young trade negotiator for the United States, this was long before you were born, this was in 1979. Some of us sat in the office of the United States Trade Representative in the White House, and we said to each other, why don't we try to revive that idea we once had back right after the Second World War of having an international trade institution? You remember the one that failed. This was in 1979. 16 years later, I was one of the 6 original co-sponsors of the U.S. House of Representatives for the implementing legislation that embraced the Uruguay-Round trade agreements that established the World Trade Organization. So, I am not deterred when someone tells me that what I proposed is impossible. I believe in human potential, and I believe we can govern ourselves, and I believe we can secure participatory democracy and sustainable development all over the world. But we have to start somewhere, don't we? And we have to be willing to try. I'm willing to try. Yes, sir, the very back of the room.
It's an interesting idea, but wouldn't the fact that you rely on volunteers introduce the same bias in the same way that there is a distrust in the institution, and so not many people go to vote? And so wouldn't there be a selections in the volunteers that again does not reconcile fully with the idea of a participatory democratic?
No, I discussed this in the book, and I think there's some truth in what you say. If we rely on volunteers instead of just taking a random sample of everyone on the planet, that will to some extent skew the results. I don't think it will skew the results in terms of a representative mirror of humanity, not if we're talking about volunteers who number into the many millions. But it will probably, and this is what I say in the book, it will probably bend the pool to include people with a bit more education, people with a bit more experience of actually participating already in the lives of their communities and their countries. I think that's true, but I weigh this against the opposite. And here again, I'm informed by the Athenian experience. I think that democracy works best and is more likely to be truly a living democracy if, in terms of governance, we have people who want to do it, who want to participate, who want to share with others in the experience of creating collective democratic human action. So that's my conclusion. Others may disagree.
Because if I can,
Yes, of course. It's a very good question.
thanks. Because as you were talking, I was thinking of these American movies. No, not American, in case my accent doesn't make it clear. Where there's a jury selection. So every citizen is a possible juror. Why not thinking in that terms? And since you said, well, there must be that we give time to these people to inform themselves, to learn information, to learn the process. So why not have, like in jury selections, anyone on the list of a citizen of the country, and then really a computer simply select a number, it's your number, we come to you, we give you 2 years of fully paid training and so on.
Well, first of all, that's not how jury selection works in the United States.
Oh, that's the movie, so that's why I said. Yeah, and then you can discuss something. I think they shall draw.
American juries, in a way, are chosen from among volunteers. The volunteers who are in the jury selection pools are those Americans who have volunteered to be eligible to vote. They're registered voters. And sad to say, we have a very high percentage of Americans who are not registered to vote. So these jury selections in the United States are only of registered voters. Now, what happens as a practical matter in the United States with a lot of people is that they don't register to vote because they don't want to serve on a jury. They'll take time away from work. The jury fees are very low. And so the question then becomes, who do we want on juries? Do we want people who will approach jury duty with the sense that it is a duty and that I want to participate with others in getting the right outcome? Or do we want people who resent being there and may use their jury service as a way of some form of idle protest, something destructive rather than constructive? I think the question is the same. I wouldn't necessarily oppose doing things in the way that you're suggesting. As I say in the book, these are my proposals. My views can change over time. There may be better proposals. And I think yours would be marginally more democratic in the sense that it would be more fully random. I concede that. But I don't know that it would actually produce the better results from the democratic process that we are seeking. Once you read the book, I'd appreciate your further comments. I do discuss this in the book. Emily.
So I wanted to return to this example you gave of the African village woman who's interested in drinkable water. So, and the larger question is about the level of abstraction at which decisions are made and then implemented. So let's say that everyone comes to this circle with a local issue. And then
That's precisely what happens in the Congress of the United States,
yeah,
where
So-
sadly there is very little deliberation.
yeah, so whatever the specific drivers and mechanisms and manipulations that were able to bring that space station approval vote into being were highly contextual and require a deep knowledge of the political ecosystem in which the problem is subsumed.
It has been said of me that I know how to get 218 votes.
Exactly. So, but you know that because you have relationships, you know how the sausage is made, and you have levers of influence, etc. So, how would that very contextual? It's the information that you have to know where you need to go, and the relationships you need to make things happen. How would that African village woman fully represent?
Well, this is a very good point, Emily, and it's one of the reasons why I so strongly favor face-to-face deliberations. If you're one of 1 million people in a global Zoom call, you're not going to be able to know any of the other people except perhaps by accident. But if you're one of 151 people in a group that, first of all, can convene if it wishes far in advance in those 9 months before the year of actual decision making, then you're going to develop relationships. You're going to get to know other people. It's only human nature to do so. Some people will be better able to do this than others. Some people are naturally outgoing. Some people have certain social and political skills that enable them to do this. But if you conduct deliberation in the right way, everyone will be heard. Everyone will be given an equal opportunity to have their say. And furthermore, everyone will know that they've been heard. So even if the decision is not quite one that they would have made, they will know that that decision was fairly found, fairly made, and they can then be more supportive of it and more trustful of it than they would otherwise have been. Furthermore, and I go into this in the book, there can always be a reconsideration. Democracy, as best is ever evolving, and whatever the rules we write are, we can always engage in reconsideration of them based on our experience of them once those ideas are implemented into action. And this would be true of circles of participation. Now, there would be turnover in these circles. And you might say, well, this requires a lot of instantaneous capabilities on the part of people. Not so instantaneous, but still, it's a weighing of whether you want people to remain in these jobs for year after year after year. It's been 30 years since I chose to leave the Congress of the United States. I have friends who were elected at the same time I was, who are still there. One woman who was elected at the same time I was announced for re-election yesterday. She's 88. Now, I've never believed in term limits other than having self-imposed them on myself. But it seems to me that democracy requires a bit more turnover. And the Athenians agreed with me. Yes, most Athenians had no opportunity to participate in democracy, shockingly so to those of us who live today. But among the minority who did, the evidence is that at one time in their lives, and in many cases, twice in their lives, because they were they were allowed to stand twice, although not successfully. About a third, maybe more, of all Athenian citizens served in some authoritative position in the governance of the city-state by means of sortition. It seems to me that what we want is that kind of a turnout. Michael?
So I should note that it is 4. So
One quick,
we've been going for an hour and a half, if everyone's happy.
I'll speak a while longer.
just a quick one, in the sense, this is my attempt at answering Emily's question. And tell me if I've kind of understood what you're saying correctly. In part of the point of the circles of participation, precisely that the decisions they reach do not depend on who you know, how long you've been there, the political party you're a member of, the channels of
Or
influence.
the nation state you're from.
Exactly. The whole point is that you take the decision making away from that whole process, which is part of what I imagine, I think you think is very flawed about what we currently have about our supposed democracy.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think my question is also about the implementation of the decision and how you could achieve that without all those power players and nation states
Yeah.
involved. So if the group says, this woman should have drinkable water in her village, what happens next?
Yeah. Well, the implementation would happen in the same way, is that you're going to continue, for example, the countries to have an executive branch of governance that would implement whatever legislators decide. What I'm talking about is 2 different fora for legislation, for legislating. But you would have, and this would vary from place to place, city to city, country to country, institution to institution, you have different ways of implementing the decisions that are made. You haven't asked the question. I will come back to you, Les.
Can I just say, Jim, just to remind you, you've got 4:15.
Yes, I've got about 10 minutes. Go ahead.
So you spoke about your faith in humanity, but also the need to acknowledge that humans are part of nature.
Yes.
So I would be eager to hear your views about some initiatives in Ecuador and some states in the US and New Zealand that have enlarged the circle of representation to include animals and other elements of the nature, like rivers and mountains, either by acknowledging they have some rights or by putting a guardian to give them voice.
I strongly support the initiatives that are underway worldwide to recognize legal rights for nature. And as I explained in the book, I would make that a part of the new approach to governance. In terms of the sortition circles, it would be the job of the circles for nature to remind decision makers of the rights of nature. As I explained further on in the book, this should not surprise anyone in that I'm certainly a believer in international law and international rule of law. The implementation of all of these decisions would be in the form of rules, of what we lawyers call laws. And one of those laws would be the law that established the rights of nature globally. I think it needs to be done in a lot of the same ways as the Ecuadorian are suggesting now, among quite a few others. I strongly support those initiatives. Thanks for asking the question. I have a whole chapter of the book on this. Chapter 7. And you, the last question, sir.
It was just a point that
This is the last question. He's been waiting patiently for a follow-up.
that relates to my 2 neighbours is the Athenians had a separate agenda setting body, the Boule 500, and that might be useful in order to have the same agendas, the same decisions made for both representatives and the circles.
I wouldn't have a separate agenda setting body. I think that's, that, down that road lies, technocratic, elitist decision-making.
Well, for the Athenians, that was the second by sortition as well.
Yes, with respect to the Athenians, and I talk about it in this book, and indeed I quote Socrates at length, who made an observation on this. Basically, Socrates said, well, we Athenians know when to seek expert advice and when not to do so. And his example was, if we want to build a ship, trireme, then we know to ask the advice of a shipbuilder. But if we are confronted with some non-technical decision, then we're all equally capable of making that decision. Now, a lot of people today would say, no, we're not. People are not equally capable of making decisions. It's the people who have more education, it's the people who have more money, it's the people who have more degrees, whatever it may be, who are more capable of making decisions, and they are the ones who should be entrusted with making them. If you have more education, then you think the people with more education should be decision makers. If you have more money, then you think the people with more money should be decision makers. And there are all kinds of voters, plural voting, for example. If I have $1 million, then maybe I should have 10 votes instead of 1. I don't agree with any of that. If one really believes in democracy, then one has to believe that everyone is equally capable of self-government. Everyone has something to contribute. And we can make people more capable of contributing through the right kinds of education and experiences, participation, learning by doing. But at base, everyone is equally capable. And furthermore, as a matter of morality, equally entitled to have a say in their governance. And I believe that. And I also believe that if you don't believe that, then you're not truly a Democrat. You're a half Democrat. I hope that some of you will read and enjoy the book. I genuinely appreciate your attention. The questions have been very probing and very helpful to me. I've enjoyed being with you very much. I look forward to returning to Sussex again and perhaps next time reading for you a chapter of my next book. Thank you so very much.